not responding now.
A judge now, huh? I hate judges because they send me to jail.
Mrs. Michelle, and all of you who are here this morning. I will now call upon Professor Khairul, Chairman of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, to address you. Thank you.
Mr. Kutrada, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Mr. President, Minister Manuel, Madiba, Mrs. Michelle. As always, on these occasions at Mandela House, my duty is a relatively brief one and an absolutely pleasurable one. That's to welcome all of you to Mandela House and thanking you for joining us this morning. Thank you for joining us in this celebratory occasion and thanking for honoring us with your presence. The Mandela House was once described by R.W. Johnson, I'm sure you all know, in one of his acerbic moments, described it as being a fortress guarded by armed police. Now, that's certainly not what we would wish it to be. We want it to be a center for participation and sharing, and as always, we thank you for being here this morning. Today, we are celebrating the launch of a most beautiful book, and Minister Manuel is the literary scholar amongst us, and he's going to speak about the book, so I won't make any further mentions about that, but we are here to celebrate the launch of a very beautiful book. That book itself, a celebration of one of the most celebrated lives of our times. It is a life that is rightfully celebrated and so often celebrated, for it represents one of the most universally inspiring examples of the 20th and the early 21st century. Now, as you will see in the program, I'm put down, if you have the program, of talking about the life of Mr. Mandela. Now, it's preposterous to try and do that. But Madiba, as you know, I always find it extremely difficult to publicly put words to what you mean and mean to all of us. The meaning of your life and the value that you brought us, that you brought to the world, are so self-evident and speak for itself that words really become trite if one tries to describe that. Let me briefly just talking about your life, one bit of intellectualization. Georg Lukács, a Hungarian-born Marxist literary scholar and philosopher, wrote somewhere about the role of narrative, the role of storytelling. And he said there was a time in human history when meaning was immanent, was itself, was clear, was self-evident in the object or the act. And that we did not need, in those days, explanatory philosophy and theory to discover meaning. Now, in the modern world, we're so alienated from ourselves, that's then when philosophy comes in. But there was a time when narrative was sufficient to explain meaning, to represent meaning. And you represent, to me, the best example of that. I once wrote somewhere that you represent to me the best example of the great modern novel. Today, I think you represent what Georg Lukács described. The meaning, the sense, the essence speak for itself. Your words, your deeds, your life. It's self-evident in its teaching, in its meaning. So pardon me if I do not speak about your life today. That life speaks for itself. Now, I know that could be interpreted as me saying that one doesn't need books about you because your life speaks for itself. No, on the contrary, the recording of memory the keeping alive of that meaning and that value for posterity is extremely important. And that's too what we are doing today with the launching of this book, recording that memory, keeping that meaning and that value alive. As I say, our literary critic will speak on the book. Just for me to say, thank you very much to all those who made this book possible. And just a few words in conclusion about the Nelson Mandela Foundation and the family of Mandela organizations. This has been a very good year for the Nelson Mandela Foundation and for the family of organizations. Finally, we've clearly established the relationship and the function of each of the three Mandela organizations. In fact, we've signed a memorandum of understanding amongst the organizations, so everybody clearly know who does what. The Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, which is the oldest of the organizations, the one which you started with your own money as president of the country, and which, Bongi, excuse me if I paraphrases badly, which represents the upliftment and the development and the caring of children. The Mandela Rhodes Foundation, which is the youngest one, and this again specializes in the developing of leadership in Africa, mainly through scholarships. And then the Nelson Mandela Foundation, which was established as a kind of a post-presidential office for Madiba, but then took on programmatic work, his school building program, his clinic building programs. We broadened into education, particularly rural education, and then with a special focus on HIV/AIDS and some of the peacekeeping operations. Now it's established its core function into the future as being a center of memory about the life and the times of Nelson Mandela. It will be a center for capturing memory, but dynamically out of that memory, conducting dialogue in our society. So this book, although not strictly a Nelson Mandela Foundation project, is very much part of that program, that vision of the NMF going forward. And finally, Mr. President, may I particularly express how honored we are to have you here with us this morning. We were honored by you delivering the Nelson Mandela annual lecture this year, and through that you established a benchmark for the future, for the intellectual quality, the moral force, and the social relevance of that. And thank you for being here today and further cementing that relationship. And we're really looking forward to a strong relationship into the future as we become the center of memory about a time, a movement in which you yourself are such an important part of that legacy going forward. I know we're all speculating where you're going post-presidency. Whatever you do, Mr. President, the Nelson Mandela Foundation is going to be here, and we're looking forward to working with you in whichever role that is. Ladies and gentlemen, as I say, I do not want to...
Rename it.
We're open to negotiation, Mr. President.